the Hargrove House charity dinner, a woman sat alone at the far end of the banquet hall near the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Nashville skyline. The left side of her face caught the chandelier light. The scarring ran from her jaw to her temple, pale and pulled tight the way old burns heal when they heal imperfectly. 3 people had passed her table in the last 20 minutes. 2 had looked away before they finished looking. 1 had moved his chair slightly, the way a man does when he wants more room and does not want to say why. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and a white dress shirt buttoned to the collar. Her hair was pulled back. She had a glass of sparkling water and a bread roll she had not touched. A man came in through the side entrance with a girl who was 7 years old and wearing a dress she had clearly chosen herself, green velvet, with a satin ribbon that had already come partially undone. He was in a sport coat that fit him the way sport coats fit men who do not wear them often. Correctly in the shoulders, slightly uncertain everywhere else. He stopped just inside the doorway and looked across the room the way a man looks when he is calculating where to be, without being a problem. Daughter pulled his hand toward the dessert table. He let himself be pulled, but his eyes stopped at the woman by the windows, not at her face, at the empty chairs around her, and the untouched bread roll, and the way she was holding the sparkling water with both hands like something to hold. He said something to his daughter. She nodded with the gravity of a child who has been consulted on serious matters. Together they crossed the room. He stopped at the edge of her table. He did not say, "Are you all right?" or "You look lonely," or any version of either of those things. He said, "My daughter has identified what she believes is the best table in the building. View, lighting, distance from the speeches. She is requesting a second opinion." The woman looked at him. Then she looked at the girl, who was watching her with the frank, unguarded attention that children have before the world teaches them to look away. She said she is correct on all 3 counts. The girl climbed into the chair across from her, without further ceremony, and reached for the bread roll. Before we go further, hit the subscribe button below and let us know in the comments where you are watching from tonight. 3 weeks before the Hargrove House dinner, on a Wednesday afternoon in late September, Nate Calloway was on the 3rd floor of a building on Division Street in the Gulch, crouching over a drainage plan he had spread across a sheet of plywood balanced on 2 sawhorses. The plywood was temporary. Most things in the renovation were temporary right now. The building had been a garment factory in 1940, a recording studio in 1978, a parking structure briefly and inexplicably in 2003, and was now in the process of becoming the Whitmore Hotel, 12 stories, 180 rooms, a rooftop bar, and one very complicated accessible entrance that the original architect had apparently considered optional. Nate had a red pen in his left hand and a measuring tape clipped to his belt and a 7-year-old's voice in his right ear. "Dad." "Yep." "Is Wednesday a school night?" "It is." "What if I just stayed up until 9? "What if you didn't?" His daughter Peanut, her name was June, but she had been Peanut since she was 3 days old and nobody was changing it now, was sitting on an overturned 5-gallon bucket at the edge of the room, working through a chapter book with a flashlight she had brought from home, because she felt the construction lighting lacked ambiance. She was 7, and she had opinions about ambiance. In the corner, half hidden behind a stack of drywall panels, was a cardboard box Nate had carried up from his truck and not yet opened. It held 2 framed photographs, a folded flag in a triangular case, and a letter from Vanderbilt University School of Engineering, dated 4 years ago, that he had also not opened. He had been moving it from job site to job site. He was not sure why he kept bringing it. He was not sure why he couldn't leave it behind. His phone buzzed. Nashville Children's Advocacy Center. Calloway. "Nate, it's Renee from the event committee. The adaptive play structure you built for the Fairview program, we're featuring it in the donor showcase at the Hargrove dinner on Friday. We'd love for you to be there. There's a seat at the sponsor table." Nate looked at June, who had looked up from her book with the precise alertness of a child who can hear the word dinner from 40 feet away. "I'm not much of a dinner event person, Renee. The families from Fairview will be there." He looked at the cardboard box in the corner. Then he looked at Peanut, who had closed her book and was now making the eyes that had been winning arguments in this family since she was 18 months old. "Will there be dessert?" he said. "There will be dessert." "We'll be there," he said. Friday came the way Fridays come when you have a 7-year-old and a job site and no one to hand anything off to. Slightly too fast and slightly too loud. June stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 6:15 doing her hair with a level of concentration that Nate reserved for load-bearing calculations. The green velvet dress had been her own selection. He had suggested the navy one. She had disagreed with a completeness that required no further discussion. He drove them downtown along the river. The Hargrove house was a restored antebellum building on 2nd Avenue with a wraparound porch and gas lanterns, and a circular driveway that had not been designed for trucks. Nate parked on the street. He walked the entrance 3 times in his head before he went through the door. He did this at every building, not because he was looking for problems, but because he could not stop seeing them. The ramp ratio was off on the main entrance by 2 degrees. The courtesy hold on the second door was mounted 18 inches too high for half the people who would need it. The step at the threshold between the lobby and the dining room was half an inch. Nothing, to most people. Everything, to some. He said nothing. He had brought Peanut into the building, and this was a party. That same Friday morning, across town in a glass office building in Midtown, Vera Strand had been at her desk since 7. She ran Strand Collective, a hospitality consulting firm she had built from a 1-woman practice into a 12-person shop over 9 years. She had 9 clients in 4 states, a reputation for fixing hotels that had given up on being fixable, and a scar that ran from her left jaw to her temple that she had stopped explaining to people 5 years ago because the explanation never landed the way the truth sounded. Her assistant Philip came in with coffee and a printed agenda. Hargrove dinner is at 7. Opening remarks at 8. Donor showcase at 8:30. You're speaking at 9:15. I know. Also, Hartley Group pushed back the Birmingham proposal. They want revisions by Monday. They always want revisions by Monday. Philip set the agenda on her desk and didn't say anything else, which was one of the things Vera valued most about him. He had been with her for 3 years. He had learned that certain silences weren't invitations. The half-second where she hadn't answered, she had been somewhere else, not the office. She had been on the kitchen floor of an apartment in East Nashville in February 4 years ago, and the smoke was below the ceiling, and she had had enough air to get to the window but not enough time to think clearly, and the neighbor's dog had been barking in the hallway, which was the last clear sound before the sound stopped being distinct. She came back. Philip was already at the door. "The navy suit or the gray one," she said. He paused. "Gray, the Hargrove crowd skews traditional." She wore the gray. Charity galas in Nashville were not cruel, exactly. They were simply spaces where a lot of people arrived already knowing what they were looking for and looked at everything else the way you look at a wall that has nothing on it. Vera had developed a system. She arrived on time, found the table with the best sightline, and sat there with a drink she didn't finish, and a piece of bread she occasionally touched, and she watched the room until it was time to do her job. She had been doing this for 4 years. She had learned that most people were not mean. They were simply elsewhere in their attention. It was the ones who tried to make a face. The deliberate, careful neutral that meant they were working hard not to react. Those were the ones that took something out of her. The man at the charity dinner that Friday had not made a face. He had looked at the chairs, and then he had walked over. His daughter was named June. June ate Vera's bread roll within approximately 90 seconds of sitting down, and then embarked on a detailed explanation of how the chandelier's light refraction could be used to calculate the approximate angle of the windows relative to true north. Vera listened with genuine attention and asked 2 follow-up questions, and June answered both of them with the air of a person who is used to being taken seriously and is trying not to show how much it matters. The man's name was Nate. He told her he was a contractor. He did not say what kind. He asked her whether she thought the Nashville hotel market was reaching a saturation point in the boutique sector or whether the data still supported new builds. She told him what she thought, which was more specific than the polite version, and he listened the way people listen when they are actually interested rather than waiting. At 8:25, the program director stepped to the podium. Our next speaker tonight has spent the last decade reshaping the way Nashville thinks about hospitality. Please welcome the founder and principal of Strand Collective, Vera Strand. The room gathered itself. Vera folded her napkin. She said, "Excuse me," to June, who said good luck with the formality of a second-in-command seeing off the general. Nate did not move. He was watching her roll to the front of the room. June, mouth still full of something she'd collected from a passing tray, looked up at her father. "Daddy, is that the same lady?" Nate didn't answer right away. He was looking at the back of her chair. The chair was a custom-frame active chair, low-slung, with a brushed titanium rear frame and a specific bevel on the rear axle housing. He knew that bevel. He had drawn it. He had drawn it 4 years ago, in a notebook he no longer opened, for a prototype he had built in a garage in Germantown before the project had been quietly absorbed by the firm that had funded it. The notebook was in the cardboard box on the 3rd floor of the Whitmore Hotel. Saturday morning. Nate was in the garage at 5:45, before June was awake, before the coffee had finished. He stood at the workbench with the cardboard box open in front of him. He took out the 2 framed photographs first. One was a job site, 2019, a crew of 6 in front of a finished adaptive playground, all of them holding coffee cups and looking like people who have not slept but are content about it. The second was a wedding photo, not posed, a candid. His wife Claire laughing at something off camera, her hand blurred because she had been reaching for him when the shutter went. He set that one face down, not because it hurt, because it didn't hurt the way he expected anymore, and that transition was something he was still getting used to. He took out the folded flag. He took out the notebook. He opened it to the page he knew was there, the rear axle housing sketch, the bevel specifications, the note in the margin in his own handwriting. "Tighter tolerance here. C says she can feel every half degree." C was Claire. She had tested the first prototype in their kitchen while he watched from the doorway pretending to be working on something else. The chair Vera Strand had been sitting in last night had that same tolerance, that same bevel. He could see it across a banquet hall in low light because he had drawn it 300 times. He sat with the notebook for a long time. "Daddy?" June was in the doorway in her pajamas, dragging the green velvet dress behind her like a cape. She had apparently slept in a way that distributed her hair across 4 different directions simultaneously. "Why are you up before the sun?" "Just looking at some old drawings, Peanut." She padded across the concrete floor and looked at the notebook. She could not read the technical notations. She looked at the sketch for a moment. "Did you make that?" "Yeah." "Is it good?" Nate closed the notebook. He thought about it for a moment with the particular care a parent gives to questions that deserve the real answer. "It was the most honest thing I ever built," he said. June considered this. Then she said, "I'm hungry," which was her way of saying she had given him sufficient time with the serious thing. He made her eggs. Monday afternoon, a courier arrived at the garage with a small envelope addressed in a precise upright hand to Miss June Calloway, C.O. Calloway Adaptive Builds. Inside was a card. "Dear June, thank you for the window and chandelier geometry lesson on Friday evening. I have a long professional history with buildings, and I had never worked that particular calculation before. I'm sending along something I think you may find useful." The bread roll was also excellent. "Tell your father his dinner company was the best part of a long week. V. Strand." Beneath the card was a hardcover book on structural engineering, written for middle school readers, not a children's book, but not yet a textbook, exactly the territory between them that a child who has opinions about light refraction would find precisely right. Nate read the card twice. He read it a third time. He set it on the workbench next to the notebook. He did not call her. He did not add a single footnote to the Whitmore proposal that was already sitting in the client's inbox. He did not write Georgia Tech, 2014, adaptive mobility research into the cover letter. He let the proposal stand on what it was. 4 weeks after the Hargrove dinner, Vera's assistant Philip walked in with a folder and set it on the desk. "Final 3 for the Whitmore site consultation," he said. "Kessler Group, Anderton and Park, and a small outfit called Calloway Adaptive Builds out of the Gulch, 2-person operation. Nate Calloway, principal." Vera looked up from the file she was reading. "The playground builder," Philip said, by way of clarification, though she had already placed it. "I called his last 2 clients without telling him. Both of them said the same thing, that he asked where the pinch points were, and then actually fixed them instead of moving them somewhere else." She picked up the folder, schedule him last. The Whitmore walkthrough was on a Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. Vera rolled into the main lobby at 9:58. The man standing near the front desk in a work jacket looked up. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been standing in a particular spot and had been waiting for the exact thing that was coming. Mr. Calloway. Ms. Strand. They shook hands. Philip, watching from the far end of the lobby, exhaled through his nose in a way he would later be unable to explain. The walkthrough went 90 minutes. She rolled. He walked. He did not push her chair. He did not step ahead of her to open doors. He did not offer to hold anything. He asked, 3 separate times, where she felt the hidden costs, the places in the building she had already learned to absorb because making a point of them was not worth it. Every time she answered, he made a mark on the paper map he was carrying. They disagreed about the service corridor on the second floor. He had proposed widening it from the north end. She had proposed leaving the width and reconfiguring the storage placement. She was correct. He took a second look, said so plainly, and moved on without performance. They were on the rooftop level, looking out at the Cumberland River, when a man Vera knew came through the access door with someone she didn't. The man's name was Don Garrett. He was 58, a board member from the development group that owned the building, the kind of man who had expensive opinions and the patience of someone who expected them to be received well. Vera, he crossed the rooftop in the easy way of a man accustomed to crossing rooms. He looked at Nate without quite looking at him. This must be your contractor. This is Nate Calloway, Vera said. Don extended a hand to Nate. Don Garrett, I want to be honest. I've been looking at the scope and I think we're overbuilding the accessible elements on the entrance level. The numbers are significant. I'm sure you can find a way to trim. He said this to Vera but directed it at Nate. Nate said, the scope is the scope. Don smiled the way men smile when they have not been given what they expected. We'll see what a second consultation looks like. He walked back to the access door. The man who had come with him followed, but as he turned he met Nate's eyes for 1 second. His name was Ray Dillon. Nate had worked alongside Ray at a firm called Meridian Applied in Atlanta briefly in 2016, before Nate had come back to Nashville for reasons that had nothing to do with work. Ray was a good engineer. He had a careful face. He did not nod. He went through the door. When the rooftop was empty, Vera said, most contractors agree with him. Most contractors haven't looked in the mirror at the end of a job and had to think about what they built. She was already rolling toward the access door. He didn't see the expression that crossed her face. She made certain of it. 6 weeks after the Hargrove dinner, a Tuesday night, and Vera was the last person in the Strand Collective office. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The street outside was quiet. She had one lamp on and the Calloway proposal open in front of her. The bid was precise. The construction timeline was realistic, not optimistic. The budget had no padding built in as a negotiation hedge, which meant it was either the work of someone very confident or someone who had simply decided to be honest. That was not what had kept her at the desk at 10:30. It was a line in the project overview section, a single sentence. Accessibility is not a feature to be added. It is the architecture itself. She had read that sentence before. She knew she had. She could not locate where. She opened her laptop and went to the academic database she subscribed to for industry research. She searched adaptive design, mobility engineering, Nashville 2014 through 2017. 3 results. She clicked the second one. A graduate thesis, author listed as N. Calloway, Vanderbilt University School of Engineering 2015. The opening sentence of the abstract, accessibility is not a feature to be added. It is the architecture itself. She closed the laptop. She sat at her desk for a while. The street light outside made a long stripe across the floor. She had decided in the time it took to close the screen that she did not want the rest of the story from an academic database. She wanted it from him. She rolled to the window. The city outside was doing what cities do at 11 at night, still moving, but slower, the kind of motion that is going somewhere personal rather than professional. She had read that thesis once, the year she was recovering. Not the whole thing, the opening. She had been looking for something. She could not have said what exactly, except that she had needed to find someone who wrote about the built environment the way she thought about it, which was not as infrastructure, but as a statement about who was welcome. She had read the abstract and remembered the sentence and forgotten the name. She had been moving through buildings for 4 years, she realized. The renovated ones, the ones that fit, the ones that did not announce what they were doing, and some portion of that had been shaped by a man she had sat next to at a charity dinner without knowing it. She thought of her mother, who had run a small bed and breakfast outside Knoxville for 30 years. She had asked her mother once how she chose which guests she remembered. Her mother had said, "The ones who don't need you to see them are the ones worth seeing." That same night, across town, June sat at the kitchen table with the structural engineering book open in front of her and a piece of paper beside it where she was attempting to reproduce a cantilever diagram from Chapter 4. She had been at it for 40 minutes. "Dad." "Yeah." "Do you think she has a kid?" Nate was washing the pan from dinner. He turned the question over the way he turned most questions from June, which was to give it the weight it was asking for. "I don't know, Peanut. I think she would be a good one if she had one." "Why's that?" June looked at her diagram. She adjusted a line. "She listened to me the whole time. Most people stop after the first window question." Nate rinsed the pan and did not say anything. He was not sure his face had the expression available that the moment called for. Later in the garage, he opened the cardboard box again. He took the wedding photo out and held it for a moment. Claire reaching, hand blurred, he stood it up on the workbench beside the notebook. He had not put the engineering notebook back in the box. It was still on the workbench where he'd left it Saturday morning. He let it stay. 8 weeks after the Hargrove dinner, the Whitmore Hotel Development Board convened in a conference room on the 11th floor, 8 people on a gray Thursday morning in November. Don Garrett arrived early. He was not the chair of the board, but he had the ease of a man who considered himself the center of most rooms he entered. He sat 2 seats from the head and arranged his folder with the deliberateness of someone who had prepared for this. "I want to thank the team for everything we've accomplished in what has been a challenging development year," he said once the room had settled. "I also want to be direct because that's what this board owes each other. The current scope for the first-floor accessible elements represents, in my estimation, a significant misallocation of development capital. I've had that concern reviewed by a second firm." He slid a folder to the center of the table. "Garrison Build Partners came in at 19% under the current contract, same scope. I'm recommending the board consider a contract change." Vera folded her hands. "Before we move to that discussion," she said, "I'd like to walk the room through the current contract with the principal designer present. I asked him to come up." The board looked at each other. Her assistant Philip slipped out and came back 2 minutes later with Nate, who was carrying a single folder and wearing the jacket that had been to one charity dinner already and was doing its best. He stood at the front of the room and presented for 5 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He spoke about entrance threshold tolerances and why the number mattered more than it looked. He spoke about the first-floor sightline problem and what the Garrison proposal had not addressed because it had not been noticed. He spoke about the projected booking demographics for adaptive accessible rooms in Nashville's current hospitality market, with 2 years of data behind each number. When he finished, Don said, "I appreciate the thoroughness, Mr. Calloway. The comparison bid is still meaningfully lower. Would you care to address that directly?" A chair at the far end of the table shifted. Ray Dillon stood up. The room looked at him. Ray was the architecture liaison the development group had brought in 6 months ago. He had been quiet through the entire meeting. "Before the board makes this decision," Ray said, "there's something I need to put in front of you. I confirmed this with Meridian Applied's legal team yesterday morning." He set a document on the table. The Garrison proposal incorporates 3 structural approaches to adaptive entry threshold design that are covered under patents filed by N. Calloway between 2015 and 2018. Meridian Applied holds the licensing on those filings. Garrison does not have a license. I'd ask Mr. Calloway to confirm whether he is the NC on those patents. The room went still. Nate said, "Yes." Don Garrett did not move. Then his color changed, the specific way color changes when a man realizes the ground he was standing on has shifted. He looked at the document Ray had placed on the table. He looked at it for a long time. Ray said, "Any award to Garrison would be subject to patent challenge within the week. The board should consider that before voting. The meeting ended without a vote on the contract change. It ended instead with a procedural motion to table the item and a review of the Garrison proposal sourcing. Don left the room first, moving quickly, not looking at anyone. The board filed out. Philip gathered his materials and was the last person through the door. It clicked shut. The conference room was quiet. The city showed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, flat and gray and ordinary. Vera and Nate were the only two people left at the table. She didn't say thank you, she said. You sat down at my table that night. You sat down at mine. Neither of them spoke for a while. The light coming through the windows was the low, honest light of a November morning that isn't trying to be beautiful. How long, she asked, did you know I was sitting in a chair you designed? Since the dinner. You didn't say anything. It didn't seem like mine to announce. She looked at the armrest of her chair, the titanium frame, the bevel on the rear axle housing that was not different from any other bevel if you had not drawn it 300 times. I had it commissioned through Meridian, she said. 3 years ago, my occupational therapist recommended the frame. She said the designer had worked with someone who had similar shoulder mobility patterns and had tuned the balance point specifically. I never asked who. Nate nodded slowly. The person she worked with was my wife, he said. Claire. She had a spinal cord injury, progressive. The first version of that frame, I built it in our garage because the off-the-shelf option sat 3 degrees wrong and she could feel every degree. She spent 4 months giving me feedback on it. The last version she tested herself, even at the end, when her arms were doing about 40% of what they used to. She said she wanted the data clean. She would not let me compensate in the measurements. He stopped. She said the chair was the only thing in our house that told her the whole truth about what she could do. Vera did not look away. I'm sorry. So am I for your accident. I've mostly stopped being sorry for it. A pause. It happened. It changed the architecture of my life. I've been working with the new plans. Yeah, he said. That's a good way to put it. He moved his hand an inch across the table. He did not reach for hers. He left it where it could be found if she wanted it. She did not move her hand away. They sat like that in the gray November light until Philip knocked softly on the conference room door and opened it a foot, and June was standing behind him in her school clothes, having been picked up early from 2nd grade by a schedule Nate had arranged the night before and not mentioned, holding a paper boat she had made in the back of Philip's car. Philip let me in the elevator by myself, she announced. I pushed the button. Vera looked at the paper boat. Did Philip teach you that? I taught Philip, June said. He was bad at it. Philip, in the doorway, addressed the ceiling and said nothing. June crossed the room and set the paper boat on the conference table between Vera and Nate. She looked at Vera. We have spaghetti on Thursdays, she said. You could come. Vera looked at Nate. She means it literally, he said. She's been planning it for 3 weeks. I put cinnamon in it, June said. It sounds wrong. Does it taste wrong? Vera asked. June considered. No. Then I'll come, Vera said. In the hallway by the elevator, Ray Dillon was waiting with his coat over his arm. Nate came out of the conference room and they met near the elevator bank without quite shaking hands. I should have said something 4 years ago, Ray said, when they pushed the patent language through. I wouldn't have been ready to hear it. I know. The elevator opened. Ray stepped in and gave Nate one short nod and the doors closed. 4 months later, the Whitmore Hotel was a construction site with intention. The first-floor entrance had been rebuilt from the threshold plate up. The sight line from the street to the front desk had been opened by moving one decorative column 4 feet east, a change so structurally simple that everyone who had looked at the original plans had assumed someone else must have already considered it. Vera had developed a habit. Wednesday evenings after the last contractor meeting, she came by the building alone without Philip in a flannel shirt and her working chair. She had 2 now, a formal 1-in-1 that had 3 years of job site on it. She brought coffee from the place across the street and rolled the progress. Not as Strand Collective, as Vera. Nate met her at the side entrance each week. June came when school didn't require anything else of her, which, in June's interpretation, was most of the time. She had been given a hard hat of her own, and a measuring tape and a small notebook with graph paper, and she had begun conducting what she called her own surveys, which consisted of sitting in various corners of the building and reporting on how the space felt from there. One Wednesday in February it rained hard. June looked up at Vera from under her hard hat and said, "We should go have spaghetti right now." Vera looked at Nate. "The cinnamon is already in the sauce," he said. "It's Wednesday, not Thursday, but Peanut's rules on this have been loosening." "My rules are fine," June said. "I'm adapting to circumstances." Nate had built a short cedar ramp at the front steps of the house 2 weeks earlier. He had not mentioned it to anyone. She rolled up it without a word. She noticed it. He knew she noticed. Neither of them said anything about it. They ate spaghetti. June ate 2 bowls and fell asleep at the table in the specific total way of a child whose body has simply decided the day is over, her cheek on her folded arms, her hard hat tipped sideways on the chair behind her. Nate got up without speaking, went to the closet, came back with a blanket, and laid it over her shoulders without disturbing her head. Vera watched him do this. They sat at the kitchen table for a while. After that, the rain doing what rain does on a February night in Nashville, which is to make the inside of a house feel specific and chosen. "I never ate dinner with anyone on a Wednesday night," Vera said. "For 4 years after the accident, I was always the last one in the office." "What changed?" She looked at the blanket on June's shoulders. Somebody sat down. He looked at his coffee cup. He looked at it for a long moment. "I haven't cooked for anyone on a Wednesday in 3 years," he said, "or a Thursday, or most nights that weren't about feeding a 7-year-old who would accept cereal." "What changed?" He looked up. "Somebody came to the table," he said. The rain went on. Under the table, the old shepherd mix that had been June's before she could pronounce his name, Bear, same logic, different dog, made a slow circle and settled across their feet. When Vera left an hour later, she stopped in the doorway. She put her hand on June's shoulder, the sleeping one. Then she put her other hand, briefly, on Nate's forearm where the pulse was. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. She rolled down the cedar ramp into the wet street, and the porch light caught the spokes of her wheels. After she'd gone, Nate carried June to bed the way you carry a sleeping child, slowly, like something you don't want to wake but also don't want to put down. He sat on the edge of her mattress for a while in the dark. Then he went to the garage. The Vanderbilt thesis notebook was still on the workbench. He had not put it back in the cardboard box. The photograph of Claire was standing up beside it. He looked at both of them for a while. He picked up the letter from Vanderbilt, the one dated 4 years ago, the one he had never opened, and held it. He set it back down. Not yet, maybe soon. He turned off the workbench light. He went inside. 10 months after the Hargrove dinner, on a clear Thursday evening in August, when Nashville smelled of summer holding on past its welcome, the Whitmore Hotel opened to the public. The preview event was held in the first-floor gathering space, which had been designed with a ceiling height and a floor plan that worked from every position and every angle, which meant it felt like a room that had always been that way and had simply been waiting for the right building around it. There were 190 guests, including 3 people who had been at the Hargrove House charity dinner the previous October and were behaving as though they had not watched a woman eat a bread roll alone at a window table. Vera spoke from a low platform built at the right height, with a podium she had specified herself in a 3-line email to the contractor 6 weeks before the opening. She thanked the design team, the construction crew, the development board minus 1 member who had stepped down in April, and the Fairview program families whose feedback had shaped the entrance level. She thanked Philip, who was standing against the back wall with his arms folded and an expression that suggested he was reviewing invoices in his head. Then she said something that had not been in the prepared remarks. "There is one person listed in the credits as lead adaptive designer who would have preferred to stay in the credits. I'm going to ask him up anyway." In the back of the room, Nate went still. June, who was standing beside him, and who had been waiting her entire 7 years for exactly this kind of moment without knowing it, looked up at her father, put both hands on the back of his belt, and pushed. He walked to the front of the room. He stepped up onto the low platform. He stood next to Vera. He looked at the room for a moment, the way a man looks at a room when he is deciding whether to say the real thing. "A building tells you who it was built for," he said. This one was built for everyone who walks or rolls through the door. That's what it cost. That's what it's worth. He stepped back. The room stood. The applause found its shape slowly. It started at the front tables, hesitated, came back stronger from the back, and settled into the kind that means the room has decided what it is clapping for and is not in a hurry to stop. Nate kept his eyes on a point on the back wall. He did not look at his hands. Don Garrett was at a table near the side exit. He had been invited as a courtesy. He was still a minority stakeholder. He stood after a moment, set his water glass down on the white linen, and walked out without incident. It was the quietest exit he had managed in a difficult year. Vera was still on the platform. She put her hand out. Nate took it. She did not let go through the rest of the ovation. At the side of the room, Philip turned slightly, appeared to consult the event program, and pressed the heel of his hand to the inside corner of his eye. June, who had eaten most of someone else's past appetizer tray in the last 10 minutes, climbed up onto a chair to see better over the adults in front of her, which violated at least two of her father's standing rules and which neither adult on the platform was paying attention to. Outside, the Nashville night did what Nashville nights do in August, which is to stay warm past when you expect it and smell of river water and cut grass. The lights along the Cumberland came on one by one. The Whitmore Hotel stood on Division Street with all its doors open, and its entrance threshold rebuilt to a tolerance of 1/4 inch, and its lobby laid out from the eye level of anyone who entered it, and for the first time in its brief reconstructed life, it was a building that did not ask anyone to adapt to it. 6 months after the opening, on a Sunday afternoon in February when the air off the Cumberland still carried winter but was beginning to negotiate, 3 people walked along the riverfront near the Shelby Street Bridge. June was ahead, at the distance June generally maintained when in pursuit of something. A pigeon this time, a gray one with a look of civic indifference that had clearly dealt with children before. She was gaining on it with the patient confidence of a person who is in no hurry because she has already decided how this ends. Behind her, Vera rolled along the river path. The path had been repaved the previous fall. It was level, which it had not always been, and she had sent an email to the Parks Department about it and gotten a response she had framed because it thanked her by name. Nate walked beside her, close enough to be present, far enough to be chosen. The chair was the same one she had been using the night of the charity dinner. She had been offered a newer model twice since then. She had declined both times. Meridian finalized the inventor record last month, Nate said. N. Calloway, all 3 generations. The legal settlement was quiet. Good. Yeah. A pause. Vanderbilt posted the fund on Friday, Vera said. The Claire Calloway Fellowship for Adaptive Design. I wanted it named first. He had to clear something in his throat before he could answer. She put her hand on the cuff of his jacket and left it there. They went another 100 feet without speaking. A couple in their 60s passed in the other direction. The woman was in a power chair. She and Vera exchanged the brief specific nod that people in chairs exchange. Not a performance, not a greeting exactly. Just a small private acknowledgement of shared territory that the rest of the world walks past without seeing. June came galloping back from the direction of the pigeon, which had apparently departed. She was holding something small in both hands with the reverence of a person transporting technical equipment. It was a riverstone, gray and smooth and river-shaped. She placed it in Vera's lap with the deliberate care of a handoff. Vera closed her fingers around it. She stopped the chair. Nate stopped beside her. He bent down, not because she needed anything, but because somewhere in the last year it had become the way they talked to each other when something mattered, from the same level, eye to eye. I never expected to be here, she said. I had plans for a different life. So did I. I'm not sorry the plans changed. He looked at her, the river behind her, the bridge cables making their long arc against the sky. Neither am I. June, sensing the weight of the moment without understanding all of it, stood very still for approximately 4 seconds, which was close to her record, and then said, "Can we get hot chocolate?" Vera looked up at her. She opened her hand and looked at the riverstone. "Yeah," she said, "let's go." They went on along the riverfront, June ahead, Nate at her left side, Vera's chair moving easily on the new pavement, the stone in her jacket pocket, the river doing its slow and constant work beside them, and a city that was, street by street and building by building, slowly learning to make room. I keep thinking about that bread roll. The one Vera hadn't touched. The one she was sitting next to for 20 minutes while 3 different people looked through her like she was part of the wallpaper. Nobody was cruel. That's the part that stays with me. Nobody walked up and said something ugly. They just didn't walk up at all. And somehow that absence does its own kind of damage, quiet and accumulating, the way water gets into a foundation. You don't see the problem until the wall starts to move. Nate saw it. Not the scar, not the chair. He saw an empty table and a woman holding a glass of water with both hands like it was something to hold on to, and he crossed the room. He didn't do it because he had figured out who she was. He did it because he was the kind of man who had been paying attention to what spaces do to people for long enough that he couldn't stop seeing it. Even at a charity dinner on a Friday night when he just wanted to find his kid a piece of dessert and go home. That's what I think about when people talk about good character. It's not the dramatic moment. It's the accumulation of small choices that happen when nobody is watching and there's no obvious reason to bother. Nate had been making those choices for years. In garages, on job sites, in the margins of engineering notebooks. He built things that told the truth about who was welcome. He did it first for Claire. Then he kept doing it because it was the honest thing to do, and he was a man who had decided, somewhere in the hardest years of his life, that honesty was the only version of himself he could live with. Vera had made the same decision from a different direction. She rebuilt her entire professional life after the accident, not by pretending the accident hadn't changed things, but by working with the new plans, as she put it. That takes a different kind of strength than most people recognize. Not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself. The kind that gets up at 7, opens the laptop, does the work, and doesn't ask anyone to acknowledge how hard it was to get there. What undid Don Garrett wasn't luck or karma in any cosmic sense. It was simpler and more mechanical than that. He built his move on a foundation that was borrowed without permission, literally, in the end, patent principles that weren't his to use. When you cut corners on the structure eventually shows you what you left out. That's not fate. That's just how load-bearing things work. And Ray Dillon. I think about Ray, too. The man who knew something for 4 years and finally said it out loud in a boardroom when it cost him something to do so. Better late than right on time, maybe. But he said it. That matters. June put the paper boat on the table between her father and Vera. 7 years old, and she already understood that the right move was to put something in the space between 2 people and let them figure out what to do with it. I don't think we talk enough about what it costs to stay honest over a long stretch of time. Not one heroic moment, a long, unwitnessed stretch, where the easier thing is always available and you keep choosing the harder one anyway. That's what Nate did with the bid. That's what Vera did every morning she showed up. That's what the cedar ramp at the front steps meant. Built 2 weeks before she came to dinner, not mentioned to anyone, not used as a gesture. Just there. The riverstone June put in Vera's lap at the end, small, gray, river-shaped. Vera closed her hand around it and kept it. Some things are worth keeping exactly as they are.